You spent weeks worrying about choosing the right assisted living for your dad. Okay, if you're honest, it was probably a lot longer than that. You toured, you retoured, asked all the right questions, and finally landed on a place that felt right. Or so you thought. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and in this episode, we are talking about what happens when your expectations aren't met, how we miss the details that matter most, and what you can do next. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, a podcast for sons, daughters, grandkids, and spouses, and all caregivers who suddenly find themselves tangled in the search for senior living and care. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our doable download in today's show notes for a printable summary of the show and a bonus tip. Hi, and welcome back to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, where we're helping families go from desperate to doable. Today, we're talking about something that I don't think it's talked about enough. And honestly, it's one of the biggest reasons that placements or moving into that senior living community doesn't work out the way families hope that it will. And that's expectations. And it's not just what you expect from a community, but it's what you expect from the process, from the care, from the communication, and even from each other as a family. A very good friend of mine once said something that has always stuck with me. She said, "There are 100 ways to do something right." And I really love that phrase because it just opens up your mind to possibilities. But it doesn't mean that every way, all of those 100 ways are going to be right for you. If you're a regular listener, you know that I help families navigate senior living every day. And I try really hard to manage expectations. But here's the truth, sometimes even you may not fully know what you're looking for yet. Because for most families, this process is completely new. And so, yes, sometimes expectations aren't met. I recently worked with a family where everything on paper lined up. The care needs were being met, the environment checked all of the boxes, and yet 24 hours after move in, something didn't feel right. And this is where families often get stuck because you start asking, wait, did we make the wrong decision? And sometimes the answer is no. It just wasn't the right fit for how your family experiences care, communication, and trust. And then sometimes the answer is yes. And I want to pause here because the truth is that sometimes things do go wrong. Sometimes you're promised something and it doesn't match up with what's actually delivered, like being told meals are all home cooked and then realizing that they're nowhere close to being home cooked, or that soup out of a can and adding some spices isn't your idea of home cooked, right? Or there might be situations where medications are being used in a way that doesn't feel right in order to manage dementia related behaviors. And let's be real here, because what I'm really talking about is over medicating. And I've seen it so many times over the years of working with families where the dementia symptom is someone who is highly agitated and active, and then they end up being over medicated as opposed to really diving in and looking at medications and interactions. And there have actually been guests on the show. I'll put a link in show notes to some of those episodes where families have had this experience. And one of my favorite episodes is with Dr. DeLon Canterbury, who is a pharmacist. You may have seen him on social media. He's out there talking about this. And it happened to him, to his family, while he was actually in school to become a pharmacist. And so these things can happen. There are things that are inherently wrong or very big mistakes, right, that can happen. And when this happens, then obviously we're not talking about expectations at that point, right? We're talking about advocacy. And sometimes it does mean that you have to make a change. But for this episode, let's go back to the expectations because I want to start with families, because this is something that I see all the time. Every family member often walks into this process of finding senior living and care with a different lens. So, your sister might be really focused on clinical care, safety, and medical needs, but you really want to feel the love, right? And I even have an episode on this. You want to feel the warmth, the communication, the emotional connection. And someone else in your family might be laser focused on cost. Of course, you have to worry about cost, right? Location and convenience. And then, and this is the one that's, I think, sometimes the toughest. Then there's someone in the family who doesn't want to be a part of the process at all until after you've made a decision. And now suddenly they've got all kinds of opinions. And that can sometimes create even more tension. And and I think the hardest part about all of this is that everyone feels their priority is the priority. And I've seen families walk into the exact same community, and one person says, "Oh my gosh, this is perfect." And then another says, "Absolutely not." And when I was that tour guide in senior living, I actually saw this play out in real time with a family that I was giving a tour. There were about, I think, 8 people on this tour, and they literally started arguing, full on arguing, right in the middle of our courtyard. It was a little embarrassing. It was hard. It was really hard because we're not talking about something that is, we're not talking about a new car, right? We're not talking about going clothes shopping. This is the care of your loved one. It's important. What I've learned is that when a move in doesn't go the way a family hoped, and thankfully that's rare, it can instantly break trust. And usually it's not because something is inherently going wrong. It's because the expectations didn't match the experience. And this is where we can do better. We can all do better, right? As that tour guide, instead of just asking, "So, what are you looking for today? A 1 bedroom, a studio, a 2 bedroom?" Instead, we should also be asking, "How do you experience care?" And let's really sit with that question for a minute because I think until we actually need care, before I ended up in the ICU a few years back and almost died, I probably didn't have a clear picture of what care really meant to me and what experiencing care means. And so it can be difficult to think about how you experience care, how your loved one experiences care. Are you someone who needs consistent communication and updates, maybe even photos? Or are you someone who's overwhelmed by too many updates and you're like, you know what, just call me if something's really going wrong? Do you feel most comfortable when things are calm and predictable? Do you value relationships and connection over structure? Or do you prefer clear, direct communication? And none of these are wrong, but they all matter. They matter a lot. And when we don't identify them early, they don't just go away. They show up later as frustration, doubt, that feeling of something just isn't right, or worse, that complete loss of trust. So, how can this happen even if we think we are asking the right questions? Because I've also worked with families who had 2 pages of questions that they came to our meeting with. And I, by the way, love all of those questions. But the truth is, this process is highly emotional. And if you're finding yourself in this process right now, then you're probably already overwhelmed. You found this podcast and hopefully this has been a great resource for you, but you're here most likely because you're already in the weeds. You're already trying to figure things out. Many of the families that I work with are also what we in the industry call the sandwich caregiver. You've probably heard that phrase by now. And that means you're caring for your aging parents while you are also caring for your own children. and you're managing your job and your life, if you even feel like you have one, all at the same time. And so when you're in that situation where you're completely overwhelmed, then you don't always know what matters most to you until something happens that doesn't feel right. Remember, this process is new to everyone until they've been through it. And if you don't work in the senior living industry, then how could you even possibly begin to understand all of the different elements that work together to make a great care experience? And sometimes it comes down to a simple thing like a rule. So, for instance, I've had families come to me and say, well, why aren't they giving my dad a bath? I'm so mad. He hasn't had a shower in 2 weeks. And I have to help them through the process of realizing that residents have rights, and your mom, your dad, they have a right to refuse a shower. It's an actual rule. Now you can dial down and say, okay, well, I want to be communicated about that. I want that communication from the staff. And you can also dial it in and say, okay, is that being documented? Can we look at it? Is it because showers are in the morning and dad prefers evening? So these are some of the details that it's not necessarily that something wrong happened. It's just your expectation of what was supposed to happen. I had another guest on the show that talks about, and again, I'll put a link in show notes to this episode, but she talks about the moment she found out that a male caregiver was going to be giving her mom a shower. She was absolutely floored. She had no idea that that was even a possibility. And so her expectation in the world of senior living and care was that female caregivers gave showers to female residents and male caregivers gave showers to male residents. But that isn't the case. And very often, you're not finding these things out or having these realizations about what's important to you until after the move, after the furniture's in, after the room is decorated, after your loved one is already living there, and now you're sitting there after all of that work and saying to yourself, something feels off, and I don't know exactly why. Maybe you didn't realize how much communication mattered to you until you didn't get a call back for a week. Maybe you didn't realize how important tone or warmth was until someone was really abrupt with you. Maybe you thought you were flexible until something didn't sit right. And now you're trying to make sense of all of that in real time while also advocating for someone you love. Another one of my clients, they experienced this exact thing. The care itself, yeah, it was appropriate, but the communication style was very direct and very clinical. And what my client needed was empathy and reassurance and to feel heard. And when that didn't happen, the trust broke down almost instantly. And in the end, we had to find a different place. So if you have felt this, if you've found yourself more stressed, more reactive, or questioning your decisions, it doesn't mean you're doing this wrong. It just means that you're learning in real time what matters most to you. It's not just about the care being right, it's how the care is delivered and how the care is received. You might have a very direct, efficient provider, right? They check all those boxes, but they're paired with a very relationship driven family. Or you might have a highly structured clinical community working with a family that values flexibility and connection. So technically, everything can be right on paper, but it's not going to feel right. And that feeling matters more than you think. So, what can you do? Right? Well, first ask yourself what actually matters most to you, not what you think should matter. And then communicate that clearly, even the small things, especially the small things. And then pay attention to how things feel, not just the beautiful community you see before you, but how do you and your loved one feel when you're interacting with the staff and the residents? and allow for different right answers, and then ask for adjustments if needed. In other words, they might be doing something that they feel is right. Allow yourself to be open to that, and then be able to also allow yourself to ask for an adjustment in what the normal routine might be. It doesn't mean you're always going to get exactly what you ask for. Sometimes it's about sitting back and being patient and seeing if that different way of doing things actually works for your loved one. But don't be afraid to have the conversation. And then let's talk about some just purely practical things that you can do before you move in the furniture. And that's if you've answered that question, what is important? What do I know is important to me, important to my loved one? Then maybe just add a few extra steps. If food matters to you, those home cooked meals matter, then try the food out before making your decision. And this is where a lot of communities are really good about inviting you to a meal. And I don't know why this is, but when I worked in that setting, I would say a lot of families declined this offer, and maybe food just was not important to them. But what I want you to hear is that it's okay to take that community up on that meal. If you're really thinking about moving your loved one in, try the food. Maybe you stop by more than once unannounced. Now, if you're a regular listener, you know that I absolutely recommend that you schedule your first appointment, your first tour, because that is where you're going to get the bulk of your questions answered. But after that, you can absolutely just stop in and just see, what is the vibe like? Well, how does it feel to you when you just stop in? And then don't just connect with the tour guide. I feel like I was a pretty good tour guide when I had that job. But guess what? I'm not the one that you're going to communicate with after your loved one moves in. The people that you're going to be truly communicating with about your loved one's care is the nurse, the caregivers, the executive director. So make sure that if communication is really important to you, that you are meeting as many staff members as you can before move in day. And I know on the surface, some of these things feel like they should be important, right? Like, well, of course, communication is important to me. But I want you to remember what we talked about earlier in the episode, and that is that sometimes people communicate differently, and it is just natural for some people to communicate more directly and for others to communicate more empathically and more sensitively. And so, really being in touch with how you communicate, I think, is what's key there. The truth is, this process is emotional. It is layered and it is absolutely so personal. There isn't one perfect answer. There's only the right answer for your family. And I really think it's important to say this again because I never want you to feel like you're imagining something. Sometimes things are off. Sometimes what you're being told doesn't match what you're seeing. And that feeling in your gut matters. Many communities are out there doing incredible work, but there are moments like we talked about earlier where families need to pause, ask those questions, and advocate for something better. I always remind my clients to go with your gut because you know your loved one better than anyone. And the more we understand our expectations and your loved one's expectations, and the more we communicate them, the more doable this journey becomes. Thanks again for joining us here at Desperately Seeking Senior Living. Don't forget to check out our doable download where I've got links to some of those episodes that I referenced earlier. You're also going to find bonus tips and show notes. And don't forget to like and share so that you can help other families go from desperate to doable. You're listening to our doable tips, short answers to your questions. Don't see your question listed? Send us a note. Then don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an answer. Today's episode is brought to you by ClearPath Senior Living Solutions. ClearPath helps families find assisted living, memory care, and other resources. Find our contact information in today's show notes. Check out this episode's doable download in show notes for details, including industry terms and definitions we discussed, as well as a bonus tip from our guest. Have questions or your own tips to share? Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, make it doable.